The Mediterranean Sea, November 2009. Somewhere between the coast of Cyprus and the shores of Syria, a rusted cargo vessel named the Meridian Star cuts through black water at 14 knots. In its hold, 3,200 crates marked agricultural equipment. But inside those crates are enough anti-tank missiles, surface-to-air launchers, and ammunition to arm an entire Hezbollah brigade for 2 years of war. The crew of 19 has no idea that among them walks a man who has been reporting their coordinates to Tel Aviv for the past 6 weeks. They don't know that 3 miles behind them, invisible in the darkness, a submarine follows their wake. And they certainly don't know that in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, this ship will become a tomb. Not a single crate will reach its destination. Not a single crew member will be allowed to tell the story of what happened. This is the operation Israel erased from history. Until now. The intelligence first surfaced in August 2009, buried in a routine signals intercept from Unit 8200, Israel's electronic surveillance division. An encrypted communication between Tehran and Damascus referenced a shipment codenamed Autumn Harvest. The phrase meant nothing to the analysts who flagged it, but when the same codename appeared in 3 subsequent intercepts, each time connected to bank transfers totaling 14 million euros, the file was escalated to the highest levels of Israeli intelligence. Mossad's research division began pulling threads. Autumn Harvest was not agricultural. It was the largest single weapons transfer Iran had attempted to Hezbollah since the 2006 Lebanon War. The cargo manifest, obtained through a source in the Ukrainian port of Odessa, revealed the true contents. Kornet anti-tank guided missiles, capable of penetrating any armored vehicle in Israel's inventory. Igla S-Man portable air defense systems, the same weapons that had downed Israeli helicopters in previous conflicts. Thousands of 122-kilometer rockets with extended range, able to strike Tel Aviv from southern Lebanon. And most alarming, components for precision-guided munitions that could transform Hezbollah's inaccurate rocket arsenal into a genuine strategic threat. The shipment was scheduled to depart Odessa in late October, travel through the Bosphorus, and arrive at the Syrian port of Latakia. From there, trucks would carry the weapons across the border into Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, where Hezbollah maintained underground storage facilities carved into mountainsides. Once delivered, the weapons would disappear into a network so dispersed that destroying them would require another full-scale war. Israeli military planners understood the stakes. The 2006 conflict had exposed critical vulnerabilities in Israel's armor and air operations. Hezbollah fighters armed with previous-generation Kornets had destroyed dozens of Merkava tanks, shattering the myth of Israeli invincibility. This new shipment represented a quantum leap in capability. If it reached Lebanon, the next war, and everyone knew there would be a next war, would cost Israeli lives in numbers not seen since 1973. The question was not whether to act, but how. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Diplomatic options were worthless. Syria would deny everything. Iran would claim the cargo was humanitarian aid. Ukraine, desperate for foreign currency, had no incentive to inspect vessels leaving its ports. The United Nations would convene committees that would produce reports no one would read. By the time international mechanisms ground through their procedures, the weapons would already be pointed at Israeli cities. A direct military strike on the ship presented different problems. Attacking a vessel in international waters would constitute an act of war against its flag state. In this case, Moldova, whose ship registry asked no questions and charged minimal fees. The crew was reportedly mixed. Ukrainian officers, Filipino engineers, Syrian deckhands. Killing civilians from multiple nations would trigger diplomatic catastrophes Israel could not afford. Mossad director Meir Dagan studied the file in his office on the top floor of headquarters in Tel Aviv. At 64, Dagan had spent his entire adult life in Israel's shadow wars. He had commanded special forces units in Lebanon, run agents in hostile capitals, and ordered operations that remained classified decades after execution. He understood that sometimes the cleanest solutions were the most violent, and that violence, properly applied, could be made to look like accident or misfortune. He summoned the commander of Caesarea, Mossad's Special Operations Division, the unit that had tracked Nazi war criminals across continents, the unit that had assassinated Palestinian militant leaders in Beirut hotel rooms and Dubai luxury suites, the unit that operated under rules no democratic government would publicly acknowledge. "I want options," Dagan said. and I want them to be deniable." The response came within 72 hours. 3 scenarios. One was deemed too risky. Intercepting the ship in Turkish territorial waters could provoke NATO involvement. Another was rejected as too slow. Sabotaging the cargo after it reached Syria would require infiltrating facilities under Russian and Iranian protection. The third option was elegant in its brutality. They would sink the ship, in deep water, with all hands. The plan required a man inside, not just any man, someone who could join the crew without raising suspicion, survive weeks at sea with hostile operators, and provide real-time intelligence to the strike team. Mossad's personnel files contained few candidates capable of such an assignment. Deep cover on a cargo ship meant no support, no extraction plan if discovered, and the near certainty that the operative would face the same fate as the crew when the operation concluded. They found their man in an unlikely place, a detention facility in Haifa, where a 43-year-old Ukrainian merchant seaman named Viktor Polenko was being held on suspicion of smuggling. Polenko had been arrested when Israeli naval forces boarded a vessel carrying undeclared cargo, not weapons, but luxury goods, evading customs duties. A minor crime, but one that gave Mossad leverage. Viktor Polenko was not a spy. He was a divorced father of 2 who had spent 20 years working the Black Sea shipping routes, watching his industry collapse after the Soviet Union's fall and scrambling for whatever jobs kept money flowing to his family in Kherson. He spoke Russian, Ukrainian, and passable Arabic learned from Syrian ports. He knew the rhythms of cargo vessels, the hierarchies of merchant crews, the bribes required at every checkpoint from Odessa to Alexandria. He was also desperate. What Mossad offered him was simple: freedom, money, and a new identity in exchange for one voyage. The recruitment took 3 days. Mossad officers presented themselves as representatives of a private security firm hired by international interests to monitor suspicious cargo shipments. They never mentioned Israel. They never mentioned that the operation would end in violence. They told Viktor he would be extracted before any interdiction occurred, a lie delivered with the practiced sincerity of professionals who had told many such lies before. Viktor agreed. What choice did he have? The alternative was prosecution, imprisonment, and the certainty that his children would grow up with a convict father who could never work at sea again. Training was compressed into 2 weeks. Viktor learned to operate a miniaturized satellite transmitter disguised as a personal music player. He memorized communication protocols, check-in schedules, and emergency codes. He practiced scenarios. What if the captain searched his belongings? What if another crew member grew suspicious? The answers were always the same. Stay calm. Maintain cover. Transmit coordinates. Help would come. On October 29th, Viktor Polenko boarded a bus in Haifa that took him to Jordan. From there, he flew to Istanbul, then to Odessa. He arrived at the port 3 days before the Meridian Star was scheduled to depart. The shipping company, a front organization with offices in Cyprus and ownership traced through 6 shell corporations to an Iranian industrial conglomerate, had advertised for an additional engineer. Viktor applied, presented forged credentials, and was hired within hours. The crew that assembled was exactly as intelligence had predicted. Captain Alexander Voronov, a 60-year-old Russian with a gray beard and the quiet authority of a man who had commanded ships through Soviet naval exercises. First Officer Haddad, Syrian, young, with the nervous energy of someone who understood exactly what cargo they were carrying. Chief Engineer Reyes, Filipino, competent but incurious. And 14 others, deckhands, cooks, maintenance workers, drawn from the Juzi, international flotsam that staffed vessels no legitimate shipping line would touch. Viktor was assigned a bunk in the crew quarters below deck. His first night aboard, he lay in the darkness listening to the ship creak around him, feeling the subtle vibrations of men loading crates into the hold and wondering if the people who had sent him here actually intended to bring him home. 3 decks above, in the captain's cabin, a conversation was taking place that would have answered his question. Captain Voronov was meeting with 2 men who had arrived from Damascus. They wore civilian clothes, but their bearing was military. In flawless Russian, they explained that additional security protocols would apply to this voyage. Radio silence except for scheduled check-ins. A specific route avoiding areas of heavy traffic. and if any vessel attempted to approach or board the Meridian Star, the captain was to follow instructions in a sealed envelope, to be opened only under those circumstances. Voronov accepted without reading it. Some questions were better left unasked. The Meridian Star departed Odessa at 04:30 on November 3, 2009. By the time the sun rose over the Black Sea, Viktor Polenko had already transmitted his first coded message: coordinates, heading, speed. In Tel Aviv, analysts plotted the vessel's course, calculating exactly where and when the operation would unfold. But Mossad was not the only predator tracking the Meridian Star. Israeli naval intelligence had designated the operation Salt Harvest, a deliberate inversion of the Iranian code name. The strike force assembled at a classified facility on Israel's Mediterranean coast would include elements from three branches: Shayatet 13, the Naval Commando Unit, a submarine crew from the Dolphin-class INS Takuma, and a Mossad tactical team. Commander Yoav Nieman led the Shayatet 13 contingent. At 38, he had conducted more maritime interdiction operations than most officers see in a career. He had boarded vessels carrying explosives to Gaza, intercepted arms shipments off the Sudanese coast. Those operations had been relatively clean, overwhelming force against crews who surrendered immediately. Salt Harvest would be different. The briefing made that clear from the first slide. Objective: total neutralization. No survivors, no evidence. The words hung in the air. Nieman had killed before, in combat where the enemy shot back. But this was something else. 19 men, most of them uninvolved in terrorism, simply crew members doing jobs they may not have fully understood. And among them, an asset who had been promised extraction. "What about our source?" Nieman asked. The Mossad liaison officer barely paused. "The source will be extracted before the final phase. He'll transmit a signal when conditions are optimal. Shayatet will retrieve him by Zodiac while the submarine positions." It sounded plausible, but Nieman recognized the careful vagueness that concealed uncomfortable truths. He did not ask follow-up questions. Some answers were better not to know. The INS Takuma departed Haifa on November 5th, traveling submerged through waters Israeli submarines knew intimately. The Dolphin-class boats were Germany's gift to Israel, constructed at subsidized prices as partial compensation for Holocaust complicity. They were among the most advanced conventional submarines in the world, equipped with torpedo tubes capable of launching cruise missiles. For this operation, the armament was conventional, heavyweight torpedoes designed to break a ship's keel in minutes. The Takuma reached its patrol zone on November 8th, and then it waited. Above the surface, the Meridian Star had transited the Bosphorus without incident. Now in the eastern Mediterranean, Captain Voronov adjusted course, a path curving south of Cyprus before turning northeast towards Syria. Viktor Polenko had established a routine that minimized suspicion. He worked his shifts in the engine room, ate meals with crew members, and transmitted coordinates during early morning hours when most slept. The satellite transmitter worked flawlessly. But Viktor had noticed troubling things. Syrian crew members kept apart, speaking in low voices. First Officer Haddad checked the cargo hold twice daily, emerging each time with a satisfied expression. The captain grew increasingly withdrawn as they approached Syrian waters. On the night of November 9th, Viktor discovered why. He had descended to the engine room for a routine check when he heard voices from an adjacent compartment, a storage area that should have been empty. Moving silently, he positioned himself near a ventilation grate and listened. Two men were speaking Arabic. Viktor understood enough to catch fragments. "The welding is complete. Timer calibrated. If they try to board, everything burns." His blood went cold. The ship wasn't just carrying weapons. It had been rigged to destroy itself, and everyone aboard, if Israeli forces attempted interdiction. The sealed envelope the captain received suddenly made terrible sense. A dead man's switch for an entire ship. Viktor returned to his bunk and lay awake until dawn, calculating his odds of survival. The Israelis had promised extraction, but if the ship exploded before they reached him, or if extraction was never actually planned, he would die alongside men he had been sent to betray. At 03 Wuker on November 10th, he transmitted an unscheduled message. Vessel rigged for self-destruction. Charges in hull. Timer suspected. Request immediate guidance. The response came 90 minutes later. Understood. Maintain position. Extraction accelerated. Stand by for signal. It was the last communication Viktor Polenko would ever receive. The accelerated timeline forced decisions that would later haunt the men who made them. At Mossad headquarters, the revelation about demolition charges changed the operations calculus. An explosive-rigged vessel could not be boarded safely. The planned sequence of extraction followed by controlled sinking was no longer viable. Director Dagan convened an emergency session with naval and intelligence commanders. 3 scenarios were presented. First, abort the extraction and sink the ship immediately, before the crew could activate charges. Viktor Polenko would die with the others. The weapons would be destroyed. No witnesses. Second, attempt high-speed extraction by helicopter while the submarine positioned. 30% success probability. Risk alerting the crew and triggering the scuttling mechanism. Third, contact the ship directly, demanding surrender and offering safe passage. This would preserve lives but sacrifice deniability. Israel's involvement would become public knowledge. The room fell silent when the options were laid out. Everyone understood what was about to happen. Dagan spoke quietly. What is the probability of successful extraction under Scenario 2? The Shayatet commander consulted his notes. 30%, assuming surprise. If they see the helicopter and understand what it means, they'll activate the charges. Ship goes up, helicopter goes down, we lose an asset and a flight crew. And Scenario 1? Near certainty of success. 2 torpedoes to the engine room will break the keel before anyone can react. She'll sink in under 4 minutes. Deep water. Wreckage won't be recoverable. Dagan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He had ordered men's deaths before. But this was different. Viktor Polenko had trusted them. He had risked everything based on their promises. And now those promises would be broken because breaking them was operationally convenient. We cannot risk Scenario 2, Dagan said finally. The weapons are the priority. Everything else is secondary. No one disagreed aloud, but later, in private conversations never officially recorded, several participants would describe this as the moment they understood how far they had traveled. From moral certainties they once believed their work defended. The order was transmitted to the INS Takuma at 1645 local time. Execute salt harvest. No extraction. Confirm when complete. Commander Ronan Ashkenazi read the message twice before acknowledging. He gathered his senior officers and explained what they were about to do. Sinking an unarmed cargo vessel without warning, without offering surrender, violated principles they had absorbed through years of service in a military that prided itself on ethical conduct. Are there any questions? There were none. Questions implied doubt. The Takuma began its approach at 1930, ascending from patrol depth to attack depth. At 2015, it reached optimal firing position, 2,000 meters behind the target, a perfect stern shot that would impact the engine room. Above the surface, Viktor Polenko was eating dinner with the crew when the first torpedo struck. He had been waiting for the extraction signal that never came. As hours passed, without communication, he had begun to suspect the truth, but some part of him still believed they would honor their commitments. That belief died in the instant the world exploded around him. The torpedo impact was unlike anything Viktor had experienced. No sound preceded it. The weapon traveled faster than noise. One moment he was lifting a spoon to his mouth. The next, the deck beneath him heaved upward with unimaginable force, throwing him against the ceiling as lights went out and water began pouring through ruptures in the hull. The second torpedo struck 11 seconds later, ensuring what the first had started. The Meridian Star's engine room disintegrated, her keel cracked, and the stern section began its descent toward the seafloor 3,000 meters below. Emergency lights flickered before failing entirely. Men screamed in languages Viktor had learned during his weeks aboard. And the sea, indifferent and eternal, rushed in to claim them all. Viktor Polenko's last conscious thought was not of his children or his former wife or the country that had used him as a disposable tool. It was simply this. They lied. The Meridian Star slipped beneath the surface at 2023 local time. Within 90 seconds, nothing remained visible. No debris, no lifeboats, no survivors. The Mediterranean closed over the gravesite like a wound healing itself. Aboard the Takuma, sonar operators confirmed the target had sunk. Commander Ashkenazi transmitted a single word to Tel Aviv: complete. But even buried secrets have ways of surfacing. The disappearance of the Meridian Star triggered immediate investigations. Moldova's Maritime Authority opened a file that would never be closed. The shipping company dissolved within weeks. Insurance claims were filed and denied. Families of crew members received notifications of death by misadventure at sea. In Tehran and Damascus, the loss was understood for what it was: an Israeli operation executed with characteristic ruthlessness. But public accusations were impossible. Acknowledging the cargo would expose Iran's weapons pipeline to Hezbollah, inviting international sanctions. Israeli media never reported the operation. Security censors ensured even rumors remained unpublished. But within intelligence circles, Salt Harvest became a case study in operational success and moral compromise. The cost was 19 lives, 18 crew members who were at worst complicit in smuggling, and one Ukrainian who had been promised safety in exchange for betrayal. 3 years later, a fragment of the truth emerged. In 2012, a former Mossad officer published a memoir referencing, in carefully vague terms, an operation involving a cargo vessel. Intelligence analysts worldwide recognized the signature. Investigative journalists began pulling threads, reviewing shipping records, tracing corporate ownership. A documentary filmmaker obtained sonar imagery showing a wreck at coordinates consistent with the Meridian Star's last position. Damage patterns consistent with torpedo strikes. Israel neither confirmed nor denied. Government spokespeople delivered the standard formulation: "We do not comment on foreign reports regarding alleged intelligence operations." Viktor Polenko's children, a son and daughter living with their mother in Kherson, were told their father's ship had sunk in a storm. They mourned him, eventually moved on, and never learned that his death had been ordered by men who had promised to protect him. But there was one more twist, one that would remain classified for decades. Among the weapons aboard the Meridian Star was a crate that hadn't appeared in any intelligence assessment: components for a chemical weapons delivery system, including specialized warheads designed to disperse nerve agents over populated areas. Manufactured in North Korea, shipped through China, added to the cargo at the last moment by Iranian handlers. Israeli analysts discovered this only after the operation, when signals intelligence revealed frantic communications between Tehran and Pyongyang about a lost shipment. The implications were staggering. If the Meridian Star had reached Syria, if those components had been assembled, if Hezbollah had acquired the capability to strike Israeli cities with chemical weapons, the next war would not have been merely devastating. It would have been existential. This information was never shared with the public or even most of the military leadership. It was held within a circle of fewer than 10 individuals who understood that their tactical success was actually something far larger: the prevention of potential genocide. Director Dagan retired in 2011. In interviews given during his final years, he died in 2016, he spoke carefully about intelligence work. Sometimes you must do terrible things to prevent worse things. The measure of success is not whether you feel good about your decisions. It is whether the people you protect are still alive to complain about your methods. He never mentioned Salt Harvest by name, but those who knew him understood he was speaking from experience, from the weight of decisions that could never be fully explained to those who had not shared the burden of making them. The Mediterranean keeps its secrets. 3,000 meters below the surface, in darkness that has never known light, the wreckage of the Meridian Star rests on ancient sediment. The weapons have corroded beyond function. The chemical components have degraded into inert compounds. The bodies of 19 men have long since been claimed by creatures that inhabit the deep. Somewhere in that wreckage lies Viktor Polenko, a man who was neither hero nor villain, simply someone trapped between forces he could not control or fully understand. He made a choice under duress, accepted promises from people who never intended to keep them, and paid the ultimate price for trusting the wrong saviors. Israel's submarine fleet continues to patrol the Mediterranean, watching, waiting, prepared to act when the next shipment threatens national security. The doctrine established by Salt Harvest, total deniability, maximum force, acceptable collateral damage, remains operational. Other vessels have disappeared in the years since, their fates similarly unconfirmed, their crews similarly forgotten. The shadow war between nations continues in shipping lanes and cargo holds, in port cities where inspectors can be bribed and registries that ask no questions. Weapons flow across borders concealed in containers of legitimate goods, and intelligence services work endlessly to interdict the deadliest shipments before they reach their destinations. Not all of them succeed. Not all of them even try to minimize the cost in human lives. But this is the world as it exists. Not the world we might wish for, but the world that emerges when states pursue security through means they cannot acknowledge and consequences they refuse to accept. The Meridian Star was one chapter in an endless story of violence conducted beyond the reach of law or accountability. There will be others. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into maritime shadow warfare revealed something about international relations you hadn't considered, hit that like button. Subscribe because we're exposing the operations that governments deny, the invisible conflicts fought on waters where no rules apply and no witnesses survive. Hit the notification bell. Somewhere right now, another ship is carrying cargo it shouldn't, tracked by eyes its crew will never see.